Hi, are you tired of this happening to you? Are you tired of wasting your money on products that don't work? Well, stay tuned. I got the solution for you. What's up guys, this is Matt from Woodworks. Welcome to your buffing masterclass. This is a video I've wanted to do for quite a while now. I constantly see questions on different epoxy forums when it comes to how to buff epoxy, what system should I use, how do I do it, what sandpapers, just a ton of questions. So I wanted to make one simple video that's going to answer, I hope, all your questions. So before we get to the actual sanding and buffing of the epoxy, we're going to cover safety. We're going to cover materials like sandpaper, your polish, that sort of thing, what sanders to use and what buffers to use and when to use them. So let's get started. The next step is figuring out what type of powered sander you're going to use. Are you going to use electric? Are you going to use air? Do you want one with a handle and a trigger? Do you want a palm style, meaning there's not really a handle on it, you're just controlling it like that? Or do you want a palm style with a trigger like this one? Now what are these sanders called? These are called dual action sanders, or DA for short. That's how I'm going to refer to it throughout the video. So when you hear me talk about a DA sander, this is it. So what is a dual action sander? Well, instead of just spinning in one direction like this, there's actually a second counterweight inside that. So what it does is it spins, but it vibrates, okay? So if you let go, that would be what a one-part sander sounds like, but you can stop it like that. Which one you're gonna use really depends on what type of equipment you have at home or at your shop. These require a pretty good sized compressor, usually about a 5 horsepower to 60 gallon at least, to run without that compressor running constantly all the time. Electric, obviously, you just need a plug in the wall. Pros and cons. Electric's obviously much more convenient. Problem is, unless you're spending $500, $600, $700 on something like a Merca or a Festool, you're gonna get this really clunky, top heavy. There's no trigger, so basically you turn it on, you have to wait for it, and turn it off. Like I said, for home, I completely understand using it, and if that's what you got, that's fine. But for somebody like me who also works in the automotive field, you really just cannot beat an air sander. The power is drastically more. The reliability, I mean, this thing is probably 20 years old, and all I've ever done is put oil in it. That's it, and it'll keep working. This thing will probably outlast me. And the price for one of these, I could buy 3 of these for what you could buy a top-of-the-line electric sander, okay? So there's also 2 different styles. Like I said, you can get the one with the handle, or you could get a palm style. So palm style just means your palm goes over it. The thing I like about this is the one I use every day. Dynabrade makes this one. The thing I like about this is that because it's a palm and it's shorter, you get a lot more control, but they also included a handle on it. So it combines kind of the best of both worlds, you know. You get the stability of a handle with the control of a palm sander and the durability and power of an air sander. For me, like I said, you pick what you want, you do whatever you want within your budget. It'll all work, but in my opinion, in my 20 years in the auto body industry where I'm sanding, literally I'm using these things 2 to 3 hours a day. Air is far superior as far as power, durability, lightness, everything. So the second thing you're going to consider when doing all this is safety. Safety is a gigantic pet peeve of mine. I cannot tell you how many videos I've watched online where people are sanding epoxy without a mask, without covering their skin, no eye protection, no anything. And I understand, because a lot of people don't really understand what the dangers are involved with breathing this dust in. And they also don't realize how much it spreads, okay? You have to wear a mask and cover your skin. I know my tats look super sweet, but I don't really need to get cancer from absorbing this nasty dust into my system. There's a couple things that you have to consider here. Everybody automatically assumes that you just breathe the dust in through your lungs and that's the only way that it can get into your body. That's not true at all. The largest portion of your body, largest absorption area of your body is your skin, because it covers your entire body. Especially when you're working in a hot, humid environment and you're sweating, the water and all that will just, it compounds the absorption rate into your skin, okay? Epoxy dust, sanding dust, wood dust, all of that can cause severe allergic reactions. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it can be years later. So it's super important to protect yourself and also protect others around you. Don't have your family around. Do not be sanding this stuff indoors. I highly, highly, highly recommend using some sort of vacuum system. I have one here on this air sander. But even these, if you unhook the filter here, that's a standard shop vac size, okay? So even though it's not the most ideal thing in the world, that'll keep the airborne dust down. You're still gonna get a little dust on the surface, but it's gonna keep all that airborne stuff, which, I mean, it's unbelievable how far that stuff travels, okay? Let's look at ways to protect our skin and protect our lungs, and then we'll keep going. So I know with this whole COVID-19 stuff, masks are, you hear about masks all day long, every day, okay? Well, as important as they are for that, they are extremely important when you're sanding, okay? So how do you figure out what type to use? You know, you've got your nice one with llamas here, strap, no filter. You have the N95 mask. You have a mask with replaceable cartridges. Also has a silicone seal here, straps that you can adjust and tighten to your face. This is another variation of N95 masks. RZ makes these, have replaceable filters on the inside. If you have a beard, these are a godsend. Venice Beach Beard Supply makes these. They're the beard safe gaiters. These also have a replaceable filter on the inside. Or you could go hardcore and get a 3M powered respirator, or PAPR for short. So, which one do you use? I'll show you. So if you don't have a beard, it's called a Bodyman respirator. I'll provide the part number and everything in the comment section after. This is the best mask you can get if you have no facial hair whatsoever. Reason for that is it completely seals around the face, and you also have replaceable filters on it. These aren't bad. These aren't bad masks, but the difference is you're relying on cotton to seal, and it's much, much more difficult to get a true good seal with this type of mask versus this type of mask, okay? So, and you can also, if you can't find these, you can get the 3M paint respirators that have more of the rectangular white filters on the side, but those aren't replaceable on the cartridges. So now let's talk sandpaper. Sandpaper, I know it's really exciting. So the first thing you need to figure out is the grits. Okay, now listen, if you're a seasoned pro, just bear with me, because I want people that, if this is their first time, I want them to have an understanding of what sandpaper is, what it does, what do the grits mean, etc. So this, you can see right there, this is 36 grit, okay? You see this is 2500 grit. See the difference between the two? One looks like rocks, one looks nice and smooth. So the number of the grits determines how coarse or how fine the sandpaper is. And it also gives you a guide as to which grit to go to next, okay? What I like to do, I like to use the 50% rule. I try not to ever jump higher than 50% from one grit to the next, okay? So if I start at 36, my next step is gonna be 80. Listen, I know the math isn't perfectly 50%, okay? Bear with me. So I'm gonna go from 36 to 80. Then from there you can go to 150 or 180, 220, 320, 400, 600, 800, etc. Okay? Your first grit always should be the coarsest you have. The reason you do that is if you use, let's say you have a really uneven surface and you need to flatten that, and you're not using a router, you're not using anything like that, you're just relying on your sandpaper to do it. Start with the coarsest grit possible, because what you want to do is you want to cut that thing as fast as possible. If you don't cut it down, or if your grit isn't up to snuff, you're going to start rounding the peaks. So what you'll have is you're going to go through all this work and you're going to buff the surface, but what you're going to find is instead of having a nice smooth glass finish, you're going to end up seeing little waves, and it just, the money that you spend on epoxy and sandpaper and tools and all the work and everything, you literally can ruin just by grabbing the wrong grit, okay? So, I recommend starting with, even if it's an uncomfortable grit to start with, like this literally looks like rocks stuck to paper, okay? But this is gonna flatten your surface 100%. Now you can use it by hand like this, or this grit also comes in DA paper sheets like this. Okay. So once you get the surface completely flat, that's the job of this first step. All the steps after that are going to be removing this scratch and then each subsequent scratch. So I'm going to use 80 to take this scratch out. Then I'm going to take 150 or 180 to take the 80 grit scratches out, and so on and so forth. All the grits after that are just to remove sand scratches. First grit to flatten, everything else to get you to your final designated grit. Now, which grit should you choose? Depends on what system you're using. If you're using a buffing system that has an aggressive compound, you have a little bit more leeway. You can stop at 2,000 or you can stop at 2,500. If you're using a system, for example, let's take 3M. 3M has a nice buffing system. However, their compound isn't super aggressive. And when you're dealing with a substance as hard as epoxy, epoxy is twice as hard as the clear coat on your car, okay? Just to put things in perspective. Your sanding is really important, as well as using an aggressive buffing compound. You can go up to 5,000 or 8,000 grit with 3M system, but for the average person, the cost is really high for those sandpapers, so it's more of like a specialty item. And really, it's not really necessary if you follow all the proper steps. The system that I have, I am very comfortable stopping at 3,000. You should easily be able to buff 3,000 scratches out without any problem whatsoever. Before I get ahead of myself, I need to cover something. When you're dealing with buffing systems, they're comprised of two parts. You have your compound and you have your polish. Your compound is going to get all the sand scratches out of the surface. The polish is going to remove the scratches from the compounding, okay? It's as simple as that. So just like with your sandpaper, your compound is going to be your coarse sandpaper in the buffing world, and your polish is going to be the finer steps to get that final glass finish that we all look for. Now 3M, like Dynabrade and like Mothers, they usually color code their pads to the steps. So your compound is going to be your white, so you got a wool and you got a white foam pad. Your polish is going to go with the black pad, and of course I forgot the blue pad, but there's a blue pad that goes with the final step here. Dynabrade does the same thing. Got your wool pad and your white foam pad that goes with the polish, or the compound, I'm sorry. Orange goes with the orange polish. And I don't have the pads for that, but it's the same thing. Before you decide any system, you need to look for a body shop safe compounding system. Now what does that mean? So a lot of the stuff that you'll buy, like your standard like home use Mothers or Meguiar's or Turtle Wax, any of those things that you'd find at like an AutoZone, They work, but they're designed to be super easy to use. So what they do is they add fillers. So even if they have compound, they'll add fillers to it. Now, what are fillers? Basically what those do is they give you a false positive that you did your job well. So it will remove some scratches, but it's also going to add fillers in there to completely cover the scratches. So you think that you did a good job, but then you wash your car twice and all the scratches come back. That's why. You have to remove all the scratches. So body shops safe have no fillers in them. Okay, so that's very important, especially if this is something that you're selling to a customer. Last thing you want is they wipe their table down a couple times, oh, your sand scratches come back, it makes your work look like crap, and it's not necessary. This is 3M's system. This works well, but it's not super aggressive. And when you're dealing with the epoxy, you need an aggressive polish, and you can't just rely on having an aggressive pad. You need an aggressive compound and an aggressive pad. Mother's works well. These smaller bottles work well, but you're dealing with smaller bottles, so it's something that you're just automatically at a disadvantage. My favorite, by far, is Dynabrade's system. The reason I like it is because it's meant for scratch-resistant surfaces, which is kind of what epoxy is. So your initial bite is going to be really aggressive, and then both steps, the initial step is aggressive, and then it kind of smooths out with the heat and as you use it. So you're less likely to get swirl marks, and the work time is longer. It's just a lot of benefits. This is also cheaper than these. By itself, they're cheaper, plus you're losing a step. This is what I'm going to use for the video. This is, if you're going to ask me, Matt, what is your system to use? This, all day long. This, 3M isn't even close to how good this system is, okay? And I do this every day, multiple hours a day for 20 plus years now, so that's my qualification to telling you what to use. So, I'm done talking, we're gonna get to buffing. So we've done all our preparation. We have all our sandpapers laid out. We've got long sleeves covering our skin. We've got our gloves on. We've got a mask. So what we're gonna do, since this board was run through the sander with 80 grit, the next step to get those scratches out is to jump up to 180. Now it's important to remember that we're not going to this next step until all these 80 grit scratches are out. This step is to get these scratches out. Once the scratches are out, then you go to this step, and this step is going to get these scratches out. So your 220 is going to get your 180 scratches out. Once you get those out, then we're going to go to 320. The 320 is going to get the 220 scratches out. And that's how you work your way up, all the way up to your final goal, which in this case is going to be 3,000 grit. A couple other things to remember when you're sanding. You don't want to sand the whole panel at once. What you're going to find is you're going to end up having a lot of patches that aren't sanded fully. So you'll have, this might be nice and smooth, but then you're going to have sand scratches here. So what you want to do is you want to work in like a 12 by 12 section at a time. So you work this section until you get the 80 grit scratches out, move to the next, to the next, to the next. It's just a simple way to make sure everything is nice and even and flat, because you've got a big surface that you're working with a small pad. So now this looks like it's done, but I don't really know until I get the dust off. So Take my alcohol, spray the surface down. That way you're not blowing dust all over the place and making the environment even more dusty, you know. Now, as you can see right here, there's actually a couple scratches still left over from the 80 grit, and that's the main reason why you wipe it off each time, because if I don't catch this now, it's gonna be extremely difficult to get out in the later steps. Not that you can't do it, but unless you wanna spend the next week sanding this thing, I suggest doing it now. And there's nothing wrong, let's say we're up at 320, and I still see some 80 grit scratches on there. If it's just that little spot, don't be afraid. Peel the sandpaper off, grab the previous step, go over the spot, peel it off, then continue on. So after the 180 is completely done, next step is 220. Now, I'm gonna take this up to 800. I'm gonna speed the video up because I'm not gonna let you sit here for half hour watching me sand because nobody wants to do that. I don't even want to do that, so I'm not gonna bore you with it. Here we go. So now that we got this down to 800, everything is nice and uniform and matte. We checked it with the light. There's no remaining sand scratches from the previous grits. So now the next step, I'm gonna jump this up to 1500. Normally I do not recommend making that sort of jump. I recommend starting at 1000 or 1200, somewhere in between there, somewhere with that 50% overlap. But just to show you that it can be done, it's not totally horrible. That's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna go from 800 to 1500. Now, I do not recommend wet sanding your epoxy if you have open exposed wood. If this was 100% epoxy and all your sides were sealed and everything like that, then by all means go ahead. But since I have exposed wood here next to the epoxy, what I recommend doing is damp sanding. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna squirt a little water, rub it into that pad a little bit. It's a little more work. You're gonna have to keep reapplying the water, but you're gonna keep the water out of the wood. The second thing I recommend to do is taking some masking tape and masking off where the wood meets the epoxy. Now we can always go back up and touch this up later if it's not totally shiny there, but this will at least give an extra layer of protection. So we got our damp 1500. And what you want to do here is you want to go slow. Do not, especially with these higher grits, do not run your sander fast, because what you're just going to burn the paper up, you're going to heat up the epoxy, and it's just, you're going to be going through paper like crazy, and you're not going to be getting a nice sand scratch. So think of it like barbecue, low and slow. You move slow, you run your speed slow, and it's actually faster doing it that way, believe it or not. You're just going to slowly work that area. Same S motion, a little bit more deliberate. You're just going to keep going. Once you see it drying out, apply a little bit more water, rub it in, keep going. And you'll see it'll actually start to get a little bit more uniform, a little bit more matte. Same thing, take your alcohol rag, wipe it down, check it with your light. And believe it or not, wet sanding, well, one of the reasons people wet sand, it actually makes your paper a little bit more aggressive. It looks like it's cleaner. I mean, you're keeping the dust down. It's not really much cleaner because you're gonna have your wet slop all over the place. See, dry, wet. But it actually it helps it to more of a consistent bite, if you will. And now this stuff is gonna cake up on the paper, so it's important. Don't be afraid to squirt some water on there. Get it off, as much as possible anyways. Never spray this on the surface unless you want your wood and epoxy to go low and slow. Remember, don't put that thing flat completely. Tilt it up a little bit. Keep moving that sander all around. S patterns. You can actually see the water evaporating as you go. I'm gonna check it one more time. Now the 1500, 2000, 2500, and 3000 are all from that Dynabrade sampler pack that came with my buffer. There's a little, 2500 really isn't included in many buffing systems. Usually it's 1500 and 3000. Actually a lot of times 2000 is omitted too. The reason that's important, and especially if you're a beginner with this sort of thing, it's a little bit more money, but you're gonna save a ton of time, and it kind of dummy proofs the system. Because a lot of times with the 3000 is so fine that you think that you'll have it sanded, but in all reality, it won't be sanded enough. And that's, I can't even tell you how many comments I see on forums that say, oh, I sanded with 3000, I did everything right, and I buffed it, and there's still sand scratches there. Well, the reason that happened is because your 1500 scratches aren't completely out yet. So it's very handy to have 2000 and 2500, because even if you don't get it out completely this way, it's kind of a nice insurance policy anyways. There's very little chance after using these two steps that you're gonna have any 1500 grit scratches. And then to go from 2500 to 3000 is like butter, pretty much. So same thing, get that nice and damp, not wet, damp. And these steps are going to go really quickly. Same thing, keep it low and slow. Try not to get all excited and do that. You don't want to do that. Slow, nice, even. Keep that S pattern going. And a good thing to remember is however long you spent on your 1500, in your head go a little bit further, okay? Now right there, think, maybe I'm done, but I'll do just one more pass just in case. It's also a good way just to force yourself to sand it a little bit longer. These grits are so fine and the epoxy is so hard that you literally could sand like this all day. Don't be afraid to keep sanding. It's only gonna benefit you in the end when you go to buff. That was it for the 2000. Now we're going to 2500, same thing. Wet, nice and slow. S pattern. Small area. See, that actually dried up kind of quickly on me. Just add a little bit more water, rub it in. But you see how it's not wet. This isn't soaked. The wood right there isn't even wet. And you might get a little residue in here. That's okay, just leave it. It's not gonna do any harm. Now the cool part about this, once you get up to the 2000 and the 2500 and the 3000, you really start to see what your epoxy starts to look like. You see the effects and stuff. And when I talk about that uniform matte finish, what I'm referring to is, if you ever see like a hot rod that's like that flat black, it's not, don't worry about that. It's not like matte, then shiny, then matte, then shiny, then matte, then shiny, okay? It's one sheen the whole way through, and that's what you're looking for. And that right there will tell you more than anything if you've got all the sand scratches out. Even if you don't have a light, if you're not, you know, whatever, you get my point. So now, I'm stopping at 3000. The reason I'm stopping at 3000 is because the buffing system I'm using is phenomenal. And I have full confidence that my compound and the buffing pads and the buffer that I'm using will easily get out 3,000 scratches. There's some other systems out there that go up to 5,000 and 8,000. I'm not gonna say they're bad, because they're not bad. It's nice to have, but they are ridiculously expensive, like stupid expensive. And it's really just not necessary unless your buffing system is trying to compensate for the fact that it's not that aggressive. See what I'm saying? So same step, got my 3000. Now be patient on this step because the 3000 is really fine, okay? It's not very aggressive and you're not removing much material at all. A little tip actually, if you have a completely epoxied surface and you want to get that matte finish, but let's say you're on a tight budget and you can't afford to, you know, spray it with a conversion coat or get, you know, Osmo that has like a satin finish or something like that, you can actually use 3000 and you just keep going over the surface, nice even patterns, and that's the one time you actually want to go the full length of the surface, but you can actually get a nice matte finish just with the 3000 itself. If you go up to 5000, it's going to be too much and it's going to start to get shiny. So if you like the poor man's matte finish, 3000 a bunch of times till it's nice and even and uniform, and you're golden. Be patient, slow. I know you want to get to that buffer. I know, it's really exciting. You feel like you've been sanding for days, but relax, okay? Okay, we dried up. The other thing you're gonna notice, the higher your grit goes, it's actually gonna evaporate a little more. I think it just tends to cake up a little bit, and so you might have to apply water more often. I actually got that a little too wet, but thankfully the tape is there to be my goalie. So we're gonna check it over with our light one more time. Everything looks pretty good, except that spot right there. So like I said, you can just go back over it, touch that spot up a little bit, skip over the area one more time just to kind of blend that in. And you can keep looking. You can get a little closer with that tape. Oh, it's freaking light. While I'm at it, one more tip. You always want to start your DA on the panel. You don't want to start it here and then hit it. You'll sand divots right doing it and you'll have to start all over again, okay? So start the DA on the panel, but don't turn it off on the panel. You want to pull it off, then let go, okay? So on, start, off, let go, okay? And that's it. We're ready to buff now. So now that we covered safety and we covered sanders and sandpapers, the next step is the buffer, okay? You have two choices here. You have a rotary style, which spins in one direction and one direction only, or like the DAs, like your sanders, they make dual action buffers as well. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both styles. Rotary buffers, like I said, they've been around for years, they're workhorses. They do work, but they require a lot of experience and a lot of time with the buffer to really get a nice even finish that doesn't end up having swirl marks in it. And the swirl marks are just a natural reaction from the motion of the pad and the style of the buffer itself. So like I said, unless you have a lot of buffing experience and you really have your buffing system down, chances are you're not going to get the finish that you're looking for. What I recommend, especially to people that are new to the system, is the dual action style. The reason being, now even though this operates at a higher RPM, it's very easy to control and there's a ton of room for error with this one because it generates less heat with the motion, because instead of having a large orbit like this one, you have much smaller circles, and the pad itself is never really spinning. It's just vibrating. And also, a lot of the epoxy projects, you're not dealing with a huge area that's gonna require this size pad. That's ridiculous. You're gonna be polishing your wood and you don't wanna polish your wood. That sounded horrible. But you need a smaller pad, okay? So I'm gonna show you how to use a rotary buffer quickly before we get into actual buffing, just to give you an idea how to use it. Thing I see beginners do all the time is they take their compound, squirt it all over the surface, smear it in, take the buffer, fire it up, and just shoot it all over the place. You make a mess. That's not at all how you do it. So it doesn't matter if you're using rotary or a dual action style. Apply the compound to the pad itself, and then use the pad to apply it to the surface, okay? You're gonna use a lot less material doing it this way, and you're gonna get more of an even distribution on the pad itself, okay? So just little globs, that's all you need. You don't need a ton. You're gonna start it on the surface. I wanna explain something. The normal rotary buffer I use has a slow start, and I wasn't used to that firing off right away. But you spread it all over the surface, and then you just slowly work a section, just like you're sanding, in that S pattern. You're also going to want to keep the pad tilted slightly, so you're only using one part of the pad. Don't stick it right in the middle there. You see how the pad's designed? It's designed to use this outer edge. So don't lay it flat, lean it up a little bit. Not crazy, you don't want it like that. Right around that area, okay? And you're gonna keep working the surface, and you're gonna go through the steps that way. I don't wanna get this too shiny. So like I said, the Dynabrade system is the one that I use. It's the one that I recommend by far. If you wanna spend twice as much money, that's up to you, but there's no benefit to it, okay? So with the Dynabrade system, same thing. You do not need a lot. A little goes a long way here. This one has a dial speed indicator and a chart. I usually will run it right around 4 or 5. With this style, like I said, the higher the speed, the better, because you get less vibration that way. And the same thing, we're gonna work a small section at the time. We're gonna start it on the surface, and when we're done, before we let go of the trigger, we're gonna lift off, okay? So a couple light hits. So this one has a slow start to it. Spread the compound on the surface area. And you're just gonna work that small little spot. And you can really put some weight on this thing, and it doesn't stop. Keep doing that S pattern just like we did when we were sanding. About a 12-inch section at a time. So we stop it off the panel. Always have one microfiber cloth for compound and one for your polish. If you use the rag that you use with the compound on your last step, all you're gonna do is wipe scratches back into the surface, and then you're gonna be angry and you're gonna start all over again. Now, like I said, epoxy is extremely, extremely hard. So if I was using this on my car, I would only have to use this step one time, one good time, and then I could move on. But because the epoxy is so hard, you're not gonna remove as much material. So you're gonna use, you might use 2 to 3 compounding steps, and that's okay. Spend the time on this step. The second step is just to remove these scratches. So you need this, you need zero sand scratches with this step before you move on. If you think you're done, do it one more time just for good measure. Now, also important to have a light to use. Believe it or not, halogen lights will actually show more scratches. So if you have like a old, one of those old square pedestal lights, or like an old shop light with a bulb in it, that's actually gonna show you more scratches than LED does. But I have LEDs, so that's what I'm gonna use. So I'm pretty happy with the surface that I have right now. It still needs a little bit more buffing around the edges here and right up here, but overall, the center of the surface, I'm pretty happy with what I have. But I'm not quite ready to go to the polish yet. We're gonna put the wool pad aside. We're gonna grab our white foam pad. Foam pad is about medium on the aggressive level, so it's still gonna be able to get the sand scratches out, but it's not gonna be as aggressive as the wool pad. Wool pad should always be your first step. This is gonna be your second step. So same thing, you don't need a lot of compound. Just 3 or 4 little dabs, that's it. We're gonna start it on the surface, spread it around. You don't even have to start it, you can actually just spread it like that, but spread it. And same thing, we're just gonna work that surface back and forth. About 12-inch area, just like before. You can go right off the edge too. Keep working it. And pay attention to the surface, because what's going to happen is the compound on the pad is going to start to dry up. And you want to stop it once it starts to dry up. Otherwise, you can actually gum the pad up, and you can actually put more scratch into it. So the compound, I forgot to mention this, but the compound itself also acts like a lubricant between the pad and the surface. So you need to always keep the area lubricated. Same thing, spread it over, fire it up. Low and slow. This does nothing. You can do this all day long, and all you're doing is just wasting your time. Slow, deliberate. Do that same S pattern, okay? Just keep working that area, and slowly work down the panel. And you don't have to lean into it. You don't want to lean into it. Just let it do its thing. Literally, it's all the pressure you should have on it. Like you're squeezing a tube of toothpaste. It's a good way for the pressure. So once we're happy with the compounding step, you don't see any remaining sand scratches or anything like that. Like I said, it's okay to see buffer marks. There's a difference between buffer marks and sand scratches. Once you're happy with the surface, then you can move on to the next step, which is your polish. Like I said, depending on the system you use, if you're using 3M, this is a 2-part system. If you're using the Dynabrade, there's 1 pad, 1 polish, that's it, and you're done. So the same thing, you're just gonna apply a few steps, a few drops to the pad. You're gonna apply it, you can let the pad do its work, or you can hit the trigger a couple times to spread it around. And same thing, we're gonna work in a small little area. Now with this, you almost want to go a little bit slower with this step. Act like you're actually melting the polish into the surface, okay? Slow, S pattern, melt that polish in. Do not let the pad dry out. So as soon as you start seeing it getting a little dry, I'm doing it a little sooner, but add some more. The reason you don't want to let the polish dry out on the surface is it can cake up on there, and that hardened bit will actually put more scratches into the panel. Okay, so you want to keep this nice and lubricated. Same thing, just apply it slowly. Just hit the trigger a couple times, let it do its work, and get right back into it. Melt that polish in. And same thing, use the light, keep yourself at a 45-degree angle, and check where you've been. Buffer's over here, but check where you've been over there. Yeah, I want to keep going. Well, like I said, because epoxy is such a hard surface, where I would normally only do one step with this, it might take 2, 3, 4 passes, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. And you can move. You can go to this side, this side. With dual action, you can, there's the other benefit I forgot to mention, you can lean this thing up in any side, okay? And because it's not spinning in one direction, you're not gonna harm the surface. So if you wanna be fancy, you wanna dance with it a little bit, you can do that too. But just keep that buffer moving, keep melting it in. Now, one thing to be aware of when you tape it, you may give it a little bit of adhesive transfer on the surface itself, and that's okay. So now we're going to take our fresh cloth that hasn't been used for anything, or if it has been used, it's been used for polish only, so we're not wiping scratches back in the surface. I'm just gonna... Now, a little tip when you're dealing with open wood like this, try not to wipe on the wood, because you can actually, you know, you could pick up a splinter or something, or a little chunk of wood, and then scratch the crap out of your surface. I gotta tell you, I am pretty happy with that. I see a couple little spots that I gotta go back in and touch up, but I'm not gonna sit here and watch you. Well, here, while we're here, that's one advantage of having a little buffer. I can go back in, if I have that tight little spot there, I can work that little spot. And even though I'm using compound, I'm not scratching up the whole surface, okay? So I go back in, I take care of that spot, grab my compounding rag, wipe up the dust, grab the polish one more time. And don't be afraid to go back and forth. It's okay. You can go back steps, even if you have scratches in the surface that are that you couldn't get out with the compound after all this stuff. Like I didn't buff this part of it. If I have some deep scratches in there, don't be afraid to grab your sander with 3000, sand that spot a little bit, then grab your compound, then grab your polish. It's okay to do that. It's actually a lot faster to sand out the scratches when they're deep like that and they haven't come out with the compound. Grab your sander, sand them, and then move on again. All right. So we'll go. Polish this thing one more time. Stay away from that wood with your cloth. Be happy with that. You're done. The important thing to remember, this, I know I did a ton of talking, way more talking than I'm comfortable doing. But I wanted to try and get every scenario that you're gonna run into when you're buffing something. This is a lot of information. I can rattle it off because I've been doing it for 20 years, but it's gonna seem overwhelming if you're a beginner, and that's okay. It's just gonna take repetition. Like I said, it's gonna be uncomfortable. The tools are gonna be like, oh my God, these tools are crazy and powerful. I don't know what I'm doing. It's okay. It's gonna feel uncomfortable for a while. Once you get it, it'll be automatic. Even though I've been doing it this long, especially if I use a new system, I'm gonna go to that system's website and I'm gonna follow all the steps that they have because they've worked out what's the best thing. Whatever system you use, follow their steps, follow the instructions. I don't care what this guy said on this forum or anything like that. Follow the manufacturer's steps. That's all I do. That's all I've done my whole career, and I've been very successful. And that's the reason that I don't struggle with things that a lot of other people struggle with. It's simple. Follow the instructions, okay? So I'm hot and sweaty, and I'm tired of talking. I hope this answered all your questions. If it didn't, if you have questions about a specific system or a tool or something you'd like to see me do a review on, please leave it in the comments. If you follow me on Instagram, my email's on there. whatever way you want to contact me, I'm not going to be like other people. I will actually respond to you because I do want people to feel comfortable with this sort of stuff. I hope this video is everything that you wanted to know. If not, like I said, message me, and that's it. Happy buffing.